Hello everyone, Sintir here with my Guild Wars 1 skill review project. Today I'm talking about the Paragon attribute line of Command, which has 19 skills in it. I tend to think of Command as being the stronger of the two between Command and Motivation. It has a lot of shouts and tends to kind of focus on that, although it has a few chants as well. And it's in part popular because of the skill Fallback, which we will talk about later. We're going to go ahead and jump into it, starting with Brace Yourself. So Brace Yourself is 5 energy, 4-second recharge time. It is a shout. You can tell because it's alphabetically at the top of the list because it starts with quotation marks. That's a key indicator of shouts. Anyway, for 13 seconds, the next time target other ally would be knocked down, all nearby foes take 63 damage instead. This is one of those effects that I've talked about some on the Monk. There's similar effects of knockdown prevention. Balthazar's Pendulum is a good example. It's a potentially useful effect that's very difficult to use well. The big reason why... So you have to target some other ally, which is fine. Only having a 4-second recharge. Note this skill does have a PvP version. I'm going to note that because I think it's indicative of one of the troubles that Paragon has is a lot of their skills have PvP versions because of how difficult it is to try to find good balance for them. So, Brace Yourself is the sort of effect that if you know a knockdown is coming, it's obviously very useful, but understanding which ally you need to protect from knockdowns is very difficult. I don't tend to use this skill very much as a result, and if I'm going to try to prevent knockdowns, it's either knockdowns to myself, using something like Balanced Stance, or more likely, there's a PvE-only skill that we will talk about next week. That's when I'm doing PvE-only skills. I think this character probably has it. I Am Unstoppable prevents you from being knocked down. Or, as an alternative, if I want to protect my party from being knocked down, there is Don't Trip, which is makes a very compelling case for itself. So, Brace Yourself. I like this sort of effect. I think this is, from a design standpoint, I like where it's at in that being able to use this to protect a single ally is good. I think single target stuff is important for Paragon to have because I think that allows it to be able to play in an area that, like when you're affecting all party members, that's inherently very strong. And so affecting only a single party member allows you to kind of boost the overall strength of the skill because it's not being multiplied by the number of people it's affecting, if that makes any sense. So single target stuff like this I think is good for the Paragon to have. It's just this is a very hard skill to use well because it requires basically predicting when knockdowns are going to happen, and that's really, really hard to do well. So I think this is like a 2 for me. The anti-knockdown tech is great. The effect on preventing the knockdown is, in my opinion, much more useful than Balthazar's Pendulum. I'd rather inflict 63 damage in a pretty decent-sized area of effect than knock down the person who is trying to knock me down, as it were. But it is very hard to use this effectively. The main time that I could see being able to effectively predict a knockdown to be able to use it would be in a situation like Giant Stomp, which is a very powerful monster-only skill, although Troy also gets access to it in one of the bonus mission packs. I'm not going to talk about those skills, though. They're too situational in that you only get them in very specific situations. Giant Stomp, however, I'd rather bring Don't Trip if I'm going to bring a skill to try to counteract it. Otherwise, I'd prefer to interrupt it. The other times that I can see this being potentially useful is to protect your frontliner as they're trying to approach the Water Trident spewing ice elementals in the southern Shiver Peaks, because they Water Trident knocks down moving targets, so you want to be able to enable them to get up to those enemies. But in situations like that, it's probably better to bring the Monk enchantment that makes them immune to knockdowns, if I'm remembering my skills correctly. So this is one of those skills where it's like, I like the effect, it's just very, very hard to use well, and the situations where I could think to use it are fairly narrow, and I feel like there's better choices in those situations. So, can't touch this. Aside from being an MC Hammer reference, this is a 5 energy, 20-second recharge shout. For 20 seconds, the next 4 touch skills used against allies within earshot fail. This applies an individual buff to each ally, and whenever a touch skill would be used against that ally, that skill fails instead. This is another 2 for me. It's a very powerful counter. Don't get me wrong. It's just, again, it's not useful unless it's in a situation where it's doing anything. The recharge is kind of long, so you're not going to like bring this and hope to gain energy off of it or anything like that. So, in my opinion, Can't Touch This is the sort of skill that I like to have exist as a powerful counter, and this is a much easier counter to make good use of, in that it's hard to use Brace Yourself because you have to try to predict which ally you need to protect, and this allows you to protect all of your allies at once. That's always easier to use. That in like preventing the next 4 is fairly strong, so I do feel like this is a fairly strong skill, compensated for by the lengthier recharge of 20 seconds, but the 20-second duration is nice as well. It's just finding the situation in which this is going to be useful. The main times I can see using this would be the Crystal Desert immediately comes to mind. There's scarabs there that use touch range skills. It's probably at least worth considering in areas where you know there are going to be enemies that use touch range skills. Starburst, I imagine it can counter things like Vampiric Touch and Vile Touch, Plague Touch. These are all excellent choices of skills to be able to counter. So I can see this being useful in something like the Crystal Desert, where there is a lot of Vile Touch and Plague Touch and that sort of stuff going around. Otherwise, like, again, this is a counter skill. They're really good at having the game, but you just don't bring them a lot of the time. Okay, that brings us to Fallback. Oh yeah, by the way, Can't Touch This has a PvP version. Fallback has a PvP version. Find Their Weakness has a PvP version. Go for the Eyes, Help Me, Incoming, all have PvP versions, as do Never Give Up, Never Surrender, Stand Your Ground, We Shall Return, Anthem of Disruption, and Anthem of Envy. And Blade Turn Refrain, which we'll get to later. So you can tell that there's a ton of PvP-only versions, so much so that as I was going through this list, I wanted to actually specifically highlight them because it stood out to me just how many there were, which I think is a consequence of how powerful shouts are, because Command, by far, is the one that has the most. The majority of its skills have PvP versions, but that's not the case in the other attribute lines. Anyway, Fallback is 10 energy, 20-second recharge, Shout. For 9 seconds, all allies within earshot gain 13 health per second while moving and move 33% faster, but it ends on an ally affected by this shout when that ally successfully hits with an attack. So if you attack anything, Fallback ends. The idea is it's like retreating, except there's already a warrior skill called Retreat. Otherwise, this probably would have that name. This is significantly better than the warrior retreat skill, though. This skill is not useful for combat, but is very useful outside of combat, and it probably would be more accurately called like press forward or march, because that's what you use it for. This is a skill used outside of combat to make it quicker to get through maps. It's kind of competing with regards to that with Charge, which is a warrior tactics shout. The advantage of Charge is it only requires 2 copies, because you can get the duration up to like the 10-second range with a 20-second recharge and keep it up continuously, but it takes 2 elite slots. Whereas Fallback allows you to be able to use it on 3 party members. Like, it takes up 3 party members' slots. It takes up 3 skill slots, which is a big cost, but it does not take up their elite slot, which is a nice trade-off. It does mean that they have to be /Paragon if that's any sort of restriction that restricts things in a way that you don't want. It only requires 8 attribute points, though, to have a good enough duration to keep it up on everybody full-time with those party members. I imagine you could get away with 2 copies if you used it on 2 Paragons with a lot of points in command, but that seems not worth it a lot of the time. This is like a 4. I don't use this all the time, and I probably underutilize it some. And I do think Charge is a worthy contender, in that using 2 warriors with Charge is a different kind of cost, and one that you can kind of get away with sometimes. For example, you could do it on an assassin that doesn't inherently need their elite for their sort of core thing that they're doing, and on like a minion master. And you could put Charge on them at similar-ish attribute levels for 2 charges that you need for 3 fallbacks. So, but fallback is extremely good, and one of the other big benefits is that health gain. Gaining 13 health per second while moving is roughly equivalent to 6.5 pips of health regeneration, and that counteracts, things like random bleeds and poisons and stuff like that, and can help patch up the party after battle and get you moving more quickly and things like that. So that's extremely useful. And so a skill like this is nice to have for quality of life sort of things, and it gives you a choice of, do you want skills that do things, because this doesn't do very much in combat, again, because it ends when you hit with an attack, but it's quality of life outside of combat. So do you want to trade quality of life for more combat effectiveness? It's very similar to in Hollow Knight. Do you want to bring, say, the Gathering Swarm and Compass for charms, or do you want to bring charms that do stuff in combat? You have to make a choice. Quality of life versus combat effectiveness. It can be an interesting-ish question, and the challenge is often sacrificing quality of life for more combat effectiveness when you actually really need it. So this is just a useful skill to have. There's not much more to say than that, I guess. Than whatever I said. Find their weakness. 10 energy, 15-second recharge, shout. For 17 seconds, the next time target ally, which could be yourself, attacks, that ally deals plus 41 damage and inflicts a deep wound for 17 seconds. This is the sort of design that I like seeing in Paragon so much. It's single target ally. It does a big buff. This is basically slapping a massive attack skill onto that ally. This is very similar to the Axe Elite Decapitate. It inflicts so much plus damage and a deep wound on top of that. This is so powerful. This is the sort of skill that I want to see, because this is what the Paragon should be doing. Something like this, or something where it's like target an enemy and apply a debuff to them that encourages allies to attack them in a way that is obvious that they're who you want to attack and things like that. You can do things like that. And Find Their Weakness is a great way of doing the party support version of that. There are no offensive shouts in the sense of shouts that you apply a debuff to an enemy with. That's not how it works, but it would have been nice to have, maybe not shouts, but maybe some other skill type that's kind of like the debuff version of a shout. Something like that would be really cool to have in the game. It's not part of it, but Find Their Weakness is the sort of design pattern that I want to see more of in Paragon. I love this design. This is also a very powerful skill. I don't bring it all the time, but I am going to give it a 4 because I feel like it's kind of worth that. Plus 41 damage and deep wound for 17 seconds is very strong, and you can place this on anyone. It's just any attack, right? Not attack skill, it's just auto attack. So any attack, whether it's attack skill or not, will trigger Find Their Weakness and just deals a huge amount of additional damage. This is a really well-designed skill, and I'm going to move on because I'm just going to repeat myself. I just love its design. Okay, that brings us to Go for the Eyes. 4 adrenaline. That's kind of it. It's a shout. For 10 seconds, the next time each ally with an earshot makes an attack, that attack has an additional 86% chance to critical hit, which is roughly equivalent to 100% chance to critical hit, at least for weapons where they get bonus chance and all that sort of stuff. This does not deal much additional damage. It will deal a little bit of additional damage if it wasn't going to be a crit, because, like I said, it often makes the next attack a crit. This skill is, however, not about that. Yes, it does do that, but it does 2 other things that are very important. 1, it applies a buff shout to allies that ends, so it triggers anything that triggers on a shout or chant on an ally ending. It triggers anything, if there is anything, on shouts or chants being applied to an ally. And critically, it gains you energy off of leadership. This skill, because again, like you apply it, it's quick to go off because auto-attacking happens a lot. So it ends very, very quickly. So it's very quick to trigger things like finales and other things that trigger on shouts and chants ending, echoes, I should say. And it's only for adrenaline, and it's adrenaline, so you get all of the energy gain from leadership. It's not a refund, right? It's straight up gain. So, like, for example, using Can't Touch This will net you energy from leadership, probably, because you're probably having 12 leaderships, so you're probably going to get up to 6 energy at least back off of can't touch this. So, that's pretty reasonable. But go for the eyes, just raw gives you that 6 energy, right? Net 1 versus net 6. So this is incredibly powerful energy management for the Paragon, and is basically a bar staple because of that. This is a 5, not because the skill on its text is a 5, but because the implications of what it does, the role that it plays for the Paragon profession, earns it that sort of score. Unfortunately, as we'll see in Motivation, it doesn't really have an equivalent. So I will even run this at, 0 command. That's happened before. Well, usually 1, but I'll run this at very low command because I don't care about the crit chance. I care about the shout ending and the low adrenaline cost of using this to fund the energy that I need to do other things. So I'm happy to run Spear Mastery, Leadership, and say Protection Prayers or Restoration Magic or anything else, and still run Go for the Eyes because I don't care about the investment. I think that that's actually a design flaw, but a design flaw in Leadership, not a design flaw in Go for the Eyes. So, yeah, I mean, this is the sort of skill Paragon uses to fuel itself. So I do think that the Imbagon build, which is a type of Paragon build, doesn't use this because I think it focuses on other things. But for general purpose, this is almost always on a Paragon bar because it's energy management. It's just raw energy, and that's really what its purpose is. Help Me. 5 energy, 10-second recharge, shout. You gain 75 health, and for 8 seconds, other ally spells targeting you cast 50% faster. This is a really interesting design. I don't have a lot of use for this skill. Now, it is energy negative in that you only affect yourself, so you're only going to gain the 2 energy from affecting yourself with it. It's not a strong heal. It's arguably better as a heal than Leader's Comfort, which is in Leadership, which is the Paragon self-heal that relies on allies around you. This does not. This is one of those designs, though. So, this is a self-heal. Obviously, you gain 75 health. It's not a lot. It's okay. But making it so that way other ally spells that target you cast faster is one of those things, this is a design that I would like in a tactics game where you're strategic and you're planning out what you're doing with your skills, and you're like, okay, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to apply a bunch of buffs to this person or heal them or whatever. It's cool in that situation. It's very difficult to use well in this game. I don't think it's, atrocious or anything, so I'm going to give it a 2, but I feel that it's really awkward and situational, and I don't even know why it has a PvP version. I imagine that this skill was maybe really abusable with, smiting prayers or something, making those casts faster, but I don't know. This is not a casually usable skill, is kind of what I'm getting at. You have to specifically be trying to do something where the increased cast speed matters, because otherwise having an oh crap I'm dying button, let's make healing me easier, is not terrible, but usually there's better uses of your skill slots, if that makes sense. This would be much more interesting if it was Help Them, where you could use this on any ally, including yourself. But as it is, the design is a bit too narrow to really have much use. Like I said, it seems a bit more interesting in very specific, you're casting a bunch of spells on me for some sort of positive effect, and making them cast faster is useful, than it is specifically a skill that I would bring ordinarily, if that makes any sense. Incoming! 5 energy, 20-second recharge, elite shout. For 9 seconds, all allies within earshot move 33% faster and gain 13 health per second while moving. If this sounds familiar, that's because it's fallback without the end clause. And 5 energy cheaper. That's not worth it. This is an elite that basically doesn't have a place. There's... The only reason I could possibly see to use this skill is to use it in conjunction with fallback on like a high command, so you can chain them back to back on one character to have one character dedicated to moving your entire party faster. And I suspect the AI is not going to do that very well. The AI handles fallback chaining just fine. It handles charge chaining just fine because they're the same skill. So they see, oh, we have the buff on you, we don't need to apply it again. I don't know if the AI properly handles switching between fallback and incoming. It's not something I've tested, to be fair. This skill did not originally have this functionality, however. When this game first came out, incoming halved the damage that allies would take for some period of time. And it turned out that that skill was completely unbalanceable, because you either make it so absolutely wretched no one would ever bring it, or everyone on you're bringing enough copies to keep it up 100% of the time. That functionality got changed into a PvE only skill, kind of, that we'll talk about when we get to those. But it means that incoming in and of itself just does not have a place. Here's the thing. There's fallback. That's an option. If I'm going into command, I'm probably bringing fallback. If I am building a team, right, where I want an increased movement speed skill for my party to use in combat, I'm probably using charge instead. Simply because there's probably other things I want from tactics or something like that. There are other elites, because here's the thing, is incoming loses the war against fallback. Being able to move during combat is just not good enough most of the time to bring it over fallback. That said, this is a perfectly fine skill. I'm going to give it a 3. I was kind of toying with where to put it, but for standard gameplay purposes, fallback is just good enough that there's no reason to waste an elite slot on incoming. And that's really what it kind of comes down to. The fact that this is much more usable during combat does deserve some consideration, but like I said, I feel like I tend to favor charge in those sorts of situations, because again, it's my elite slot. And actually, if we go over to warrior, and I go into tactics, I believe this character does have charge. So with 10 tactics, how long does charge last? Or I could be wrong and this character doesn't have charge. Never mind me. But anyway, charge lasts a bit longer, I believe, per attribute point. So, and removes crippled, which can sometimes be useful, but mostly it's just like it lasts longer per attribute point. So usually that's going to be my preference over incoming. But it's serviceable. Yeah, let's move on. Make haste. 5 energy, 10-second recharge, shout. For 17 seconds, target other ally moves 33% faster, but this skill ends if that ally successfully hits with an attack. Okay. So one of the things that you're going to see as a recurring theme is that it's very difficult to figure out how to make skills for the Paragon. There's a lot of different themes that exist in the game, as it were. Like there's different ways of buffing allies. There's increasing damage. There's reducing damage that they take in different ways. There's healing allies. And there's like changing stuff, like making them deal different type of damage or something like that. Applying health regeneration, giving them energy. There's only so many ways that you can do things. So there are actually a lot of options that the Paragon has for increasing movement speed for allies. So something like Lead the Way, which makes an ally move faster for each ally with near shot and can target yourself. That's an option. And I believe there might even be one other option. Hasty Refrain is another option for making allies move faster. And you'll notice that Hasty Refrain and Lead the Way don't end when the ally hits. So even within Paragon, I'm just glancing through, I don't think there are any options for that in Motivation. That's not what Motivation does. But even in Paragon, just by itself, there are multiple options for this sort of effect. And if I go to other professions, there's, say, Windborne Speed that the Elementalist has that does this sort of effect. And again, does not end when the ally successfully hits with an attack. This end clause kills this skill. I like the idea on its base, right? Shout for 17 seconds, target other ally moves 33% faster. Great. As soon as you add that end clause, it becomes garbage. Just because there's so many other options for allowing allies to move faster. This could have been a perfectly fine skill at maybe a lower duration, but if it also removed cripple instead of ending faster, or something like that. Or, maybe if it was target other ally doesn't, instead of moving 33% faster, say moves 15 or 20, 25% faster, something like that, but ignores things that would decrease their movement speed. You could do something like that. Again, shorter duration, tweak the numbers to make it that balanced and that sort of thing. Again, I like single target skills in Paragon. I think that they're interesting. They don't work as well with leadership, which is a problem, but Make Haste, unfortunately, is... I don't know when I would ever want to use this skill, because that end after an ally successfully hits with an attack clause is so detrimental. That just happens so often, so easily. The only time that you really... this allows you to get a warrior up to somebody, or something like that, a melee attacker up to someone. And otherwise, it allows a kiting ally. So kiting is the process of running away from an attacker, like a kite flying or whatever. So it allows that sort of ally who's trying to evade enemies to be able to do so more successfully. But if they ever stop to attack, the buff goes away. And basically for that end clause, I'd want a much shorter recharge, so that way it would be a more usable, a more frequently usable skill, or something like that. But there's just so many options for increasing movement speed already in Paragon, not to mention there are other options in the game as well, that this is just extremely underwhelming in my opinion. And enough so that I'm actually going to give this one a 1. It feels a little harsh, and it's maybe a little harsh, but it's directly competing with other Paragon skills, and losing badly, so that's just where it's going to need to be for me. Okay. Never Give Up. 5 energy, 15-second recharge, shout. All allies within earshot and below 75% health gain 8 energy. This one's very similar to Never Surrender, in that they both have the same stats and similar below 75% clauses. I like this sort of design. I think this sort of design is interesting. It's a shout that doesn't affect all allies, but can affect all allies. To me, that's an interesting space to be in. This also provides some durability to a party in a very nice way, in that it provides additional energy that allows them to be able to do stuff. When your party's starting to get weak, having Never Give Up and Never Surrender on your bar is quite strong. So I like this one quite a bit, and I do tend to bring it fairly often. I'm going to give it a 4. If I'm going into command, which often I am, I'm usually bringing Never Give Up and Never Surrender, because they are solid skills. I guess I don't have much more to say about it than that. I like the sort of straightforward, simple effect. I like the condition. I think designing this with a condition like this is a good idea, because it makes it less consistent and less reliable, but it becomes more reliable the more important it is to have it be reliable, if that makes sense. You most want this skill to do the maximum that it can when you need that maximum. Because it triggers if your entire party is dying, then this is going to help give a nice buffer, as does the next skill, Never Surrender. So Never Surrender is 5 energy, 15-second recharge, shout. For 15 seconds, all party members within earshot and below 75% health gain +4 health regeneration. So this adds a lot of nice additional durability to your party. Again, that's 8 HP per second. And so I'm going to give this one a 4 as well. I bring the skill quite often. And again, I like the design spot. This is a way of being able to support allies without having to try to target a specific one, but not consistently. When it's at its most consistent is when you need it most. And that to me is a really interesting design. It's the sort of design where it's like, hey, this skill will allow you to be able to keep your party alive more effectively in the situation where they are all dying. And it will maybe help you keep a couple allies alive who are dying and stuff like that. And I like that spot that it's in. So I think it's a very good skill. And so usually when I'm in command, in Command, I'll bring it. I will say that I tend to err on the side of never surrender over never give up if I only have limited slots, just because the energy gain is nice, but this is 15 seconds of +4 health regeneration, or maybe +3. Like if I'm at 10 commands, no, it's still +4 at 10 command. At 8 is when it's at +3. So even at 3, it's all right, and at +4, it's quite solid. So I like the design again because I feel it's a way to help your party, and I've gone all over that already. So let's go ahead and move on to Stand Your Ground. So this is 10 energy, 20-second recharge, shout. For 17 seconds, all party members within earshot receive +24 armor when not moving. So this is a buff that you can apply to your party to make them more durable, if they're willing to stand there and get hit, which is not necessarily a good idea. I don't tend to bring this skill. It does add a nice bit of durability. I don't know why they like to use 24 for the armor count for some reason. I do prefer Watch Yourself over this because Watch Yourself just works, and this requires party members to not move. The other reason why I don't tend to bring this skill is I don't know how well it works on heroes. I'm usually playing with heroes, and this skill requires you to not move, and heroes tend to run around when they're getting attacked. So I have the suspicion that it's not too effective on heroes, if that makes sense. I kind of would have liked... I would have liked this to be a single target skill that's like target ally gains, stuff while not moving, or something to kind of... But like more stuff, or like whenever target ally takes damage, if they weren't moving, they get healed, or something like that. That to me would be really interesting. So if it was kind of more of a healing seed variant that only worked while they didn't move, I would like that a little bit more than this design. But like single target healing seed sort of thing. Or healing hands, I guess, would be more accurate. I would like something like that, because I think that would be a more compelling and more interesting skill to make use of. This one, I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's all right. Again, I don't tend to use it much, not because I don't think it has a pretty solid effect. It does make you a lot more durable, but because I don't know that heroes use it very well. In that, I don't know that I trust heroes to kind of stand there and take hits in order to reduce the damage that they take from them. I could be wrong, but that's kind of my rationale, as it were. We Shall Return. I've mentioned this one a bunch, actually, talking about Light of Dwayna, and there's some ritualist skills as well. This is 25 energy, 30-second recharge, shout. All party members in earshot are resurrected with 45% health and 17% energy. This is a very powerful resurrection skill. It happens instantly, and an instantly happening resurrect is very powerful, because normally resurrection skills have very long cast times. They have 4+ second cast times. The 3-second activation of a skill like healing, Resurrection Signet, which we will talk about next week, is quick for a resurrection skill. So one that happens instantly, like this one, is really good just on its surface to begin with. The fact that this affects all party members in earshot, which is a very big area of effect, is incredibly strong. So I don't always bring this, but often if on characters that I'm giving, say, fallback to, I will bring this. I'm going to give this one a 4, but keep in mind it's kind of a higher 4. It's not quite 5 because it is very expensive, and it does require you to go Paragon Secondary, and to really make this effective well in combat does require a sizable investment in command. I generally prefer Resurrection Chant for low attribute investment resurrection skills, especially on Mesmers, but I like this skill really well. I mean, it works great on Paragons, but it works really well on like Elementalists that have a lot of energy. Keep in mind that 25 energy cost is very substantial, especially if you're racking up death penalty on characters like a Warrior or a Paragon, or like a Ranger or something like that, or basically any non-caster that might get down below that 25 energy required to use the skill. That's something to be aware of. It's not necessarily the greatest concern, but this is an incredibly powerful resurrect. I do recommend having some resurrection chants though, resurrection chant or like flesh of my flesh, just because those can result with higher health with less attribute point investment. But if I'm having a character that's just like fall back and we shall return, maybe never surrender or never give up, that seems like a great augment to a party to me. So I'm quite fond of this resurrection skill. It is extremely powerful, and the earshot range is, I think, the biggest of AoE resurrection spells as well. I would have to check that against Eternal. Do I have that so I could check it? Probably not. No. Well, not / warrior especially. Yeah, Eternal Aura. This is party members in the area, so it's even a bigger area of effect than Eternal Aura has. So, just stuff to keep in mind. I do like We Shall Return a lot. Design-wise, I think it's in a reasonable place. 25 energy is a lot, and 30-second recharge is lengthy enough. And the amount that people are resurrected with is tight enough that it's a really good way to kind of bring yourself back, but it's not guaranteed. So I kind of like the spot that it sits in pretty well as well. Anthem of Disruption. So anthems are going to be chants. I think they usually affect attack skills. So there's a name scheme to chants. So I think anthems affect attack skills, and if we glance through all of these, that seems to be holding. Anthem's not necessarily at the front. We'll talk about it a lot more. Like, there's a couple more anthems here that I think all affect attack skills. There's a few quirks, like Defensive Anthem technically doesn't affect attack skills, although it kind of triggers off of them. Motivation is where we're going to see a lot of that. Like, there's arias and ballads and choruses and lyrics and stuff like that, songs. So we'll talk about those a lot more when we get to that point in time. But just be aware that chants that have anthem in the name, that probably means they care about attack skills. So in this case, Anthem of Disruption is the skill we're talking about. It is 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 15 second recharge chant. For 8 seconds, the next attack skill used by each ally with an earshot also interrupts an action. This is... Okay, so this is the problem with Paragon. To maximize the effectiveness of the skill requires me to have an attack skill on every character. Just that's how it works, right? So the fewer characters you have with attack skills, the worse this skill gets. Further, usually in higher level PvE, you want to load up on casters that do not have attack skills. That decreases the value of this skill and of all anthems, because it means that they intrinsically have less to work with, fewer party members to work with. The effect of interrupting the next action that an enemy does with the attack skills is relatively strong, but a lot of the time it's going to be hard to actually use this in an effective way where you're interrupting a skill. It might just interrupt auto-attacking. That's really important to keep in mind. But it will catch skills to some extent. It can be really obnoxious if, in fact, all of your party members do have attack skills that they use while Anthem of Disruption is on them. At that point, if they all target like a couple of different people, it can be very disruptive for that like volley of attacks. But interrupting specific things, I feel like this one's all right. I'm going to give this one a 3. The effect is totally there, but it is kind of a bit tricky to build around. I think it's okay if you have 3 or 4 attack skills that can happen with this, which is certainly a reasonable thing to do. But yeah, it's difficult to try to figure out where to place this one, and it might be kind of a low 3 where it's like maybe a 2 is a little bit more appropriate, just because it really to get most effectiveness, you really do have to like load out heavy. But I think it's okay enough at sort of a medium level of attack skill usage that I'm probably okay with giving it a 3. So this is going to go back to that design stuff I was talking about earlier. I think that the idea of this skill is sweet. I think that the execution of the skill has problematic incentives in terms of, it's not bad per se in terms of the incentives, but it encourages you to have as many characters with attacks as possible, or you feel like you're not getting full value out of it. If this was something where it was like target ally and all allies in nearby range of that ally get the buff, or something that was a little bit more limited in scope in terms of the allies it affected, or if it was like target ally interrupts with their next attack skill and costed appropriately to that. I don't know what would make this kind of fit right, but it feels like chants, which usually I think affect all allies, are made to work with leadership, and that like it creates a distortion in how the skills are perceived, and it makes balance really difficult, and all these sorts of things that I talked about in the intro. So keep that in mind as we go on, because I don't need to repeat it every time, or we're going to be here for forever. But it is an unfortunate frustration of how that works. That brings us to Anthem of Envy, which is 6 adrenaline, 1 second activation time, no recharge. Adrenaline takes care of that. Chant for 10 seconds. The next attack skill used by each ally within earshot deals plus 22 damage against foes with more than 50% health. So this is a nice variant of an order. When I say an order, I'm talking about like Order of Pain or Order of the Vampire. They're necromancer enchantments that are very short duration, but make allies that deal physical damage deal additional damage. This does more damage, but only on the next attack skill, and only to foes with 50% or more health, but it's a little bit different in its usage. This is the sort of effect that's kind of like a nice filler for Paragon. Being adrenaline, it works really nicely with leadership for gaining you energy. So mechanically, in terms of how the game is presented to us, I like this one decently well. I am going to give it a 3. I don't bring it a lot. Again, it has, like, it's sort of energy management, and if I want additional energy management in command, in addition to Go for the Eyes, then Anthem of Envy is usually what I will go to for that. But it really does become lackluster if you do not have a bunch of attack skills on your party. Like, again, the more attack skills you have in your party, the more effective Anthem of Envy is. I kind of wish it was next attack. That would probably be way too strong, in that it would effectively deal like 160 plus damage in an 8-person party, which would be way too much. But, you know, you could drop the numbers a bit or tweak them or something. So yeah, there are some other options as well, but this one is like, this is fine for an Anthem, and because it works really nicely with leadership because of adrenaline costs, I actually like it reasonably well. But it's kind of a second choice after Go for the Eyes. So yeah, that's kind of where it fits for me. Anthem of Guidance, 4 adrenaline, 1 second activation time, no recharge. Again, adrenaline takes care of that. Elite Chant, for 10 seconds, the next attack skill used by each party member within earshot cannot be blocked. So the first obvious thing about the skill is there's no green text. It doesn't scale with command. It doesn't require command. I don't know why it's in command. This is a no attribute skill masquerading as a command skill because that's where it was stuck. I don't know why. The other thing is, this is not worth an elite slot. Making the next attack skill by each party member unblockable is just not worth it. If I want to make attack skills unblockable, I have Guided Weapon for that. That's probably the best choice if I'm trying to buff my allies to do that. Oh, by the way, that doesn't take up an elite slot. Alternatively, I can use Rigor Mortis on a Necromancer to prevent blocking. I can use skills to end the things that cause blocking. This is... The effect itself is... So, if this was not an elite skill, I would probably be okay with bringing it some of the time because it would be kind of a go for the eyes. Actually, I would like this pretty comparably to go for the eyes. Go for the eyes being a shout does give it a little bit of an edge as kind of like that filler, and that doesn't have the activation time, and that's a big benefit. And it can trigger on casters more effectively for like ending and all that sort of stuff. Like it has advantages over this one, so I'd still pick go for the eyes over this most of the time for like a filler, give me energy skill. But this would potentially be able to be one that I would consider some of the time. But as it is, being an elite, only the next attack skill being unblockable, even if it's for all party members, is not worth it. I'm going to give this guy a 1, but I'm going to add one qualification. This skill feels like it's designed for PvP. And the reason why I say that is because making all the next attack skill unblockable in PvP is way more valuable. Because you throw this on your allies, and then they can land a spike. And it can't be blocked. Things like Guardian cannot help defend against it. That's really strong, and that's really useful, and I think that's the only reason this is an elite. Because this effect is really good in PvP. In PvE, it just doesn't do enough of the time. Again, if I'm going into an area where I know there's going to be a lot of blocking, I have choices of dealing with it. First of all, I'm probably bringing a lot of casters, which block does nothing against. Second of all, I can use something like Guided Weapon or Rigor Mortis to be able to make my physical attackers hit, or they can bring skills that can specifically deal with say, stances or with enchantments. Like, there's ways of addressing those issues that Anthem of Guidance is unimportant for. So, this skill to me is just not worth using in PvE ever. So Crippling Anthem has the exact same costs and does something that I find more useful than Anthem of Guidance. So I'm literally never bringing Anthem of Guidance because I can just bring Crippling Anthem if I want a random elite to be energy management-y from Command. And so it's a difficulty of design is kind of what it comes down to. I would have preferred this to be like a single target for 10 seconds. Target allies' attack skills can't be blocked. Something like that. It'd probably have to be more like 6 adrenaline or something like that at that point. Or maybe have the duration scale with Command, for crying out loud. Something where, like, it suddenly becomes really useful in certain situations and stuff like that for a single target. And that would be really interesting to me. But the party next attack skill variant that we have here is just very, very uninteresting to me. Okay. And unfortunately, it also is going to highlight a general problem, which is that I feel like Paragon Elites were almost chosen at random and don't seem very good. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of them were chosen for skills that become a bit better in PvP than PvE. And it's just an unfortunate trend that we're going to see. I am very underwhelmed by the vast majority of Paragon Elites. Okay, Anthem of Wariness. 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 10-second recharge chant. For 8 seconds, the next attack skill used by each ally with an earshot also causes weakness for 13 seconds. Okay. Look, weakness is really easy to apply. You can use Thunderclap, you can use Enfeebling Blood, which is probably the number one choice I have. To do it, there's a bunch of options, or at least a few options that you have with the Dervish for inflicting it in an area of effect. There's a PvE only skill technically that you can use to inflict weakness in an area of effect if you want to. Of course, only players can do that. There's a couple of other options too. Hammer can inflict weakness pretty easily. Withering Aura in the Necromancer attribute line is another way of doing it. And I prefer that one over this. Anthem of Weariness is one of those skills where it's like, this is not a good skill. Making the next... again, it has the attack skill scaling problem that I've been talking about with all of the anthems as well. And I think there are better ways of applying weakness. I think that there are better ways of gaining... there are better chants to use if you just want chants. If you just want filler chants, there are other options that I think are more useful. Such as Anthem of Flame. because burning is a more useful condition than weakness. This one, I want to give this guy a 1 because I just feel, you know, I'm going to give this guy a 1 because there are so many other ways of inflicting weakness that I think are just better. I don't know when I want to use this guy. When would I use this guy? I don't have a whole lot more to say. It's just an incredibly underwhelming skill. Blade Turn Refrain. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 8 second recharge, Echo. For 20 seconds, target non-spirit ally has a 17% chance to block incoming attacks. This Echo is reapplied every time a chant or shout ends on that ally. So this is one of those skills that looks kind of bad on the surface. 17% chance to block incoming attacks is frankly not impressive. I'm guessing that's about a 1 in 7. 1 in 8 would be 12.5%. Let's see. 1 in 7. 100 divided by 7 is going to be 1 carry the 3. So 15, so it's going to be a little over 15. So this is somewhere between 1 7, 1 and 6. 6 is going to be, again, 1, and then 40, it goes into 6 times. So yeah, this is about 1 in 6. It's not quite 1 in 5. 1 in 5 would be 20. So this is about 1 in 6 attacks are going to be blocked, which is actually not terrible. The other thing, though, that's really important to keep in mind is that this is a refrain. So it's the type of echo that keeps reapplying itself. So there's a couple of things that's really important to keep in mind with it. First of all, this is just kind of like a passive, like, keep your ally more durable, kind of long-term sort of thing. This will mitigate a little bit of damage. You know, roughly a 1/6 of attacks. But that's not bad. And if you're doing a bunch of fallback stuff and have a go for the Eyes Paragon that's probably using this skill, it's actually not unlikely that this skill can stay up a long time on your allies. This is the sort of skill that actually has a much longer duration than that 20 seconds implies, because it's very easy to keep this up even between battles if you're doing fallback chains. You know, one fallback ends, refreshes the refrain, the next one goes up, etc. So I actually think that this skill is a little bit better than it looks on the surface and will mitigate damage a little bit better than one might think or assume. I don't think it's a stellar skill. I don't think it's a standout skill. I think it highlights some of the problems of echoes in general. But I think I'm going to give it a 3. I don't tend to use this one a lot, but I think it's an all-right skill. And certainly it does do a little bit of damage protection. I prefer something like Guardian or Aegis that is more long-term, but this can't be removed. So this is a nice little extra little bit of buffer. So I think this is a fine skill. Again, though, I personally would just completely redesign the Paragon from the ground up. Might be a fun exercise to experiment with sometime, but that's neither here nor there. Crippling Anthem, 4 adrenaline, 1 second cast time, elite chant for 10 seconds. The next attack skill used by each ally with an earshot causes crippling for 13 seconds. Crippling is actually a relatively useful condition. It allows you to catch up to enemies. It allows enemies to not be able to catch up to you. So I actually think that Cripple itself is a really useful effect. Crippling Anthem, on the other hand, again, it encourages you to bring a lot of attack skills. I think the sort of low cost of using this actually makes it reasonable. I'm going to give this one a 3. Because I like it substantially better than Anthem of Guidance, because Cripple is way more useful than next attack skill being unblockable. This can work particularly well with like some assassin stuff that triggers on Cripple, such as Trampling Ox, I want to say, and Jungle Strike, which is nice. And in general, like, I want several people using attack skills. You're probably one of them. I would want someone in addition to the Paragon, probably 2 other attackers, but spreading around Cripple like this on the sort of frequency that this can come up is actually kind of useful. So as I think about this skill, I think this one's all right. Not necessarily a high choice and a questionable use of my elite slot, but an all right use of my elite slot, if that makes sense. I don't hate it like I do Anthem of Guidance, just because Cripple, I think, is a condition that I tend to undervalue and is actually pretty useful. So, I think this one's okay as a result, and the cost of it is very low, and it works well with leadership. So there's some pluses with it there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our last command skill, Godspeed, which is very strange in that it's a shout, but it doesn't have shout question marks or quotation marks around it for some reason. It's just written like a normal skill. It's 10 energy, 30-second recharge, shout. For 17 seconds, all allies within earshot move 25% faster while under the effects of an enchantment. This one's weird. So it's not elite. So part of what's weird about it is Paragon has a lot of skills that are like, don't be enchanted. We're going to see that, or not a lot. It has a minor sub-theme. Natural Temper and Signet of Synergy being kind of the main ones that are like not being enchanted that I can think of off the top of my head. There might be another one or two, but it's kind of it's a little bit of a thing in Paragon, so seeing a skill that specifically wants allies to be enchanted is kind of odd. I think this is one of those skills that I have a hard time evaluating how good it is, because making all allies run faster is good, but the conditional of being under an enchantment is a condition. The biggest issue for me with this skill is the ratios are off. So it's not a reliable skill for movement speed, especially outside of combat. So this is kind of a combat-based increased movement speed skill. And I don't know when I want that versus one that can be used outside of combat. So basically I prefer something like incoming or charge or fallback over Godspeed most of the time, because most of the time I want to increase my party's movement speed outside of combat, because that's more quality of life useful. If I want to increase it inside combat, I can use something like incoming or charge, which are elites. So a non-elite skill that can be used in combat but can't really be used outside of combat for party movement speed is dubious and questionable, and its unreliability, like, this is the sort of skill that I look at and all the stats are just a little bit off, right? 25% is not quite 33. Requiring an enchantment is definitely a restriction. So why does it have a 10 energy cost and a 30-second recharge to 17-second uptime? This is the sort of skill that I'd want to have like a 15-second recharge, or have a much longer duration so I could keep it up all the time off of one character, because I do feel that it's hard to make optimal use of, but I legitimately don't really know where to kind of put this. Enchantments are common enough that it's not hard to make some use of. I just don't know how easy it is to make good use of. So I like a skill that makes it difficult to evaluate where it is. I don't think this is a great skill, but I don't think it's a bad skill. I'm just going to kind of give this a 3 by default and say I need further testing to see how this actually plays, because it's always read kind of weak to me. But I can see where, like, oh, I'm using this skill, and all of a sudden, when I throw Guardian on my somebody who's getting attacked, they can run away more effectively. Or when I put Vigorous Spirit, I think it is, on an attacker, suddenly they can catch up to people. Like, that seems great. So I feel like this skill maybe works. I just really wish it had 100% uptime in and of itself, and it doesn't, and that to me feels incorrect. But I don't know. Anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap things up for Command, since we've gone through all of the Command skills. So next time we'll talk about leadership, and until then, everyone, take care, and goodbye.